What truly purchases power? Is it a vault overflowing with gold florins, glittering under the Tuscan sun? Or is it an army whose loyalty is forged in steel and blood, willing to die for a banner, not a coin? 500 years ago, amidst the marble palaces and shadowy alleyways of Florence, a city drunk on wealth and artistry, one man wrestled with this very question. He watched bankers become princes and popes wage wars, and in the crucible of conspiracy and betrayal, he discovered a terrifying truth. The answer defines the fragile line between an enduring reign and an inevitable, brutal fall. This man, Niccolo Machiavelli, would write a manual for survival, a chilling guide that peels back the gilded facade of authority to reveal the raw mechanics of control, a lesson that echoes from his time to our own, whispering that the greatest fortunes can crumble to dust with a single act of disloyalty. The air in 15th century Florence was thick with the scent of money, incense, and freshly cut stone. It was a city built by capital, where the Medici family, merchants turned unofficial royalty, governed not by divine right, but by the sheer weight of their ledgers. They were the masters of a new universe where credit and debt were the true arbiters of fate. Yet beneath the veneer of prosperity, a deep fragility festered. The city's immense wealth made it a target, a jewel coveted by rival states and ambitious kings. Its defense was outsourced, entrusted to soldiers of fortune, the condottieri, men who sold their swords to the highest bidder. Machiavelli, a sharp-eyed diplomat navigating this treacherous world, observed this paradox daily. He saw that the gold that adorned the city's magnificent domes was the same gold that paid for its precarious safety, a safety that could be rescinded the moment a richer offer was made. This opulent stage was set for a spectacular collapse. The reliance on mercenaries created a fatal illusion of security, a belief that wealth could substitute for genuine strength. Machiavelli witnessed firsthand how loyalty bought with money was a fleeting commodity, an alliance as shifting as the Arno's currents. These hired armies, with their flamboyant leaders and exorbitant demands, were a constant drain on the treasury and a source of perpetual anxiety. They lacked the visceral connection to the land and its people, fighting not for a cause or a homeland, but for a contract. It was in this glittering, unstable world, a world of breathtaking art and cutthroat politics, that Machiavelli began to formulate his most radical and enduring idea, that the true sinews of war, and therefore of power, were not gold, but something far more primal and difficult to cultivate: good soldiers, bound by an unwavering allegiance to the state itself. Niccolo Machiavelli was not a prince, a banker, or a general. He was a bureaucrat, a man of the second rank, who served the Florentine Republic for 14 years with a fierce and pragmatic patriotism. His office was the world of diplomacy and statecraft, a relentless chess game played across the fractured Italian peninsula. He traveled on missions to the courts of kings, popes, and emperors, his gaze absorbing every detail of their power, how it was won, how it was wielded, and most importantly, how it was lost. He saw the intricate dance of alliances, the whispered promises, and the cold reality of military force that underpinned every negotiation. This was his education, not in the dusty libraries of philosophy, but in the corridors of power where the fate of nations was decided by a single miscalculation or a moment of indecision. He was a student of reality, not theory. From this vantage point, Machiavelli diagnosed the fatal sickness at the heart of Florence, and indeed of many Italian states: an over-reliance on apparent power. The Medici had shown that wealth could seize control of a city, but they had also shown its limits. Florence could fund lavish projects and bribe potential enemies, but it could not inspire the kind of visceral loyalty that makes a farmer take up a spear to defend his home. Machiavelli understood that money was a means, a potent one, but it was never the end. The ultimate currency of power was control over human will, the ability to command obedience not just when the sun was shining and the coffers were full, but in the dark hour of crisis, when everything was at stake. He was obsessed with this gap between the illusion of strength and its grim substance. His professional life became a testament to this struggle. He tirelessly advocated for the creation of a citizen militia, an army of Florentines fighting for their own city, arguing that their commitment would far outweigh the fickle professionalism of hired soldiers. He saw the condottieri for what they were: businessmen of violence, whose primary loyalty was to their own profit, not to the state that employed them. He witnessed them demanding higher pay on the eve of battle, abandoning a siege for a better offer, and treating warfare as a theatrical enterprise with minimal risk to themselves. For Machiavelli, this wasn't just poor strategy. It was a profound misunderstanding of human nature. He knew that the man who fights for a paycheck will always be outmatched by the man who fights for his family, his land, and his honor. Then, the floor fell out from under him. In 1512, the fragile Florentine Republic collapsed, and the powerful Medici family, backed by Spanish arms, returned to power. Machiavelli, a prominent servant of the old regime, was immediately cast out. His world was shattered. Stripped of his position, he was later wrongly implicated in a conspiracy against the new rulers. He was arrested, thrown into the dark confines of the Bargello prison, and subjected to the brutal torture of the strappado, his arms dislocated as he was repeatedly hoisted into the air and dropped. It was in this crucible of physical pain and profound humiliation that the diplomat was burned away, leaving the core of the political philosopher. He had seen the mechanics of power from the inside, and now he was feeling its full merciless weight upon his own body. Released but broken, he retreated to his small farm in Sant'Andrea in Percusina, a political outcast exiled from the city he loved. There, in the quiet solitude of his study, surrounded by his beloved classical authors, Machiavelli began to write. He poured all his experience, his frustration, and his sharp, unsentimental analysis of power onto the page. The result was a slim volume that would scandalize the world. The Prince. It was not a work of abstract idealism, but a raw, practical guide born from failure. He wrote not for saints or scholars, but for a ruler who might one day unify Italy and expel the foreign invaders. He was transmuting his personal ruin into a timeless lesson, a desperate attempt to understand why he, his city, and his republic had failed so catastrophically. The answer, he was convinced, lay in their fatal misunderstanding of the nature of power itself. To understand Machiavelli's deep-seated distrust of money as the foundation of power, one must first confront his visceral hatred for the mercenary system. He saw these hired armies not as a tool of the state, but as a cancer upon it. A prince who bases his security on the swords of soldiers for hire, he argued, builds his house on shifting sand. These men, the condottieri, were entrepreneurs of violence, their allegiance tethered not to a flag or a people, but to the weight of the coins in their purse. They were professionals of war, which meant they had a vested interest in its continuation, but not necessarily in its conclusion. A decisive victory that ends a conflict is bad for business. A prolonged, low-risk campaign that keeps the state's treasury flowing into their pockets is the ideal scenario. This fundamental conflict of interest made them, in Machiavelli's eyes, the most dangerous investment a ruler could possibly make. Their loyalty was a commodity, openly traded on the marketplace of war. A prince might pay a fortune to secure the services of a famed captain and his army, only to find that his rival has made a more lucrative counteroffer. The battlefield for them was not a crucible of honor, but a stage for negotiation. Machiavelli writes with dripping contempt of their choreographed battles, elaborate spectacles with much clashing of steel and thunder of hooves, but remarkably few casualties. Why would they risk their lives, their capital, in a brutal fight to the death? It was far more profitable for one band of mercenaries to capture another, hold them for a hefty ransom, and then release them to be hired again. This was not war as a political instrument. It was a self-perpetuating, parasitic industry that drained the state's resources while providing a lethal illusion of safety. This illusion was perhaps the most dangerous part of the bargain. A prince, sitting in his palace and reviewing the muster rolls of the thousands of soldiers his gold had bought, might feel secure, powerful even. He could point to his well-equipped cavalry and seasoned infantry as proof of his might. Yet this entire structure was hollow. The moment true crisis arrived, the fortuna that Machiavelli was so obsessed with, the unforeseen storm of invasion or rebellion, that's when the illusion would shatter. In the face of genuine danger, when the risk of death outweighed the promise of pay, the mercenary's calculus would inevitably shift. His loyalty, bought for a price, would evaporate. He would flee. He would mutiny, or worse, he would turn his sword against the very master who had paid him, seeing a greater opportunity in betrayal than in service. Machiavelli didn't need to invent hypothetical scenarios. He was surrounded by recent history, littered with the wreckage caused by mercenary betrayal. He had studied the careers of men like Francesco Sforza, a brilliant condottiero, who was hired by the Duke of Milan to defend the city, only to use the army he was given to seize Milan for himself, establishing his own dynasty on the ruins of his employer's trust. This was the ultimate cautionary tale. The state had paid for the very instrument of its own destruction. The money did not buy security, it funded a coup. This example, and countless others like it, became the bedrock of Machiavelli's argument. He saw that by outsourcing its own defense, the state was not just spending money, but relinquishing the very monopoly on violence that defined its sovereignty. This leads to one of his most stark and uncompromising conclusions. A state must possess its own arms. An army composed of citizens, men fighting for their own homes, their own families, and their own future, is the only reliable foundation for security. Their motivation transcends payment. It is rooted in a sense of belonging, of shared destiny. Such an army might be less polished, less experienced than a band of grizzled mercenaries, but its spirit, its willingness to sacrifice, is infinitely greater. This citizen soldier is bound by law, by love of country, and by a personal stake in the outcome of the conflict. He does not see war as a business opportunity, but as a grim necessity for survival. This is the only force, Machiavelli insists, that a prince can truly call his own. The problem, of course, was that building a citizen army required more than just money. It required trust, organization, and a shared sense of civic identity, qualities that were in short supply in the fragmented political landscape of Renaissance Italy. It was easier, quicker, to simply write a check. The reliance on mercenaries was a symptom of a deeper political sickness, the disconnect between the rulers and the ruled. A prince who does not trust his own people enough to arm them is already living on borrowed time. He is governing a collection of individuals, not a unified political body. Machiavelli's insistence on a national army was therefore not just a military doctrine, it was a political one. It was a call for a new kind of state, one built on a foundation of mutual obligation between the prince and his subjects. Consider the stark contrast in incentives. The mercenary captain fears losing his men because they are his source of income. He will avoid risky engagements and prioritize their preservation above all else, including the strategic objectives of his employer. The prince commanding his own troops, however, knows that victory is the only true security. He is willing to spend the lives of his soldiers, and even his own, to achieve a decisive outcome, because the survival of the state is at stake. This willingness to embrace sacrifice, to risk everything for a cause greater than oneself, is the core of what Machiavelli called virtù, that untranslatable concept of martial prowess, skill, and courageous agency. It is a quality that money cannot buy. The historical record was his ultimate witness. He saw how the French monarchy, with its national army, could march into Italy and shatter the armies of the wealthy city-states. He observed the discipline and effectiveness of the Swiss pikemen, who fought for their own cantons with a terrifying ferocity that no mercenary force could match. These were not the richest powers in Europe, but they were among the most militarily effective. Their strength came not from their treasuries, but from the organization and spirit of their people. They demonstrated in brutal and undeniable fashion that a small force bound by loyalty could defeat a larger one motivated only by greed. For Machiavelli, this was the ultimate proof that the sinews of war were not gold but good soldiers. This logic exposes the mercenary bargain as a slow-acting poison. In the short term, it solves a problem. A prince needs an army, he pays for one, and it appears. But over time, it creates a crippling dependency. The state loses the art of war. Its citizens become soft and unwilling to fight, and the ruler becomes a mere manager of contracts rather than a true leader of men. He is a customer, not a commander. He loses the ability to shape his own destiny, becoming hostage to the whims and ambitions of the soldiers he pays. The state becomes hollowed out, a beautiful gilded shell with no core of strength. When the storm of fortuna inevitably hits, the shell will crack and the prince will be left with nothing but a handful of useless coins. Ultimately, Machiavelli's argument against mercenaries is a profound meditation on the difference between a transaction and a relationship. Hiring a mercenary is a transaction. It is cold, impersonal, and lasts only as long as the payments continue. Building a national army is about fostering a relationship between the ruler and the ruled, based on shared identity, mutual trust, and a common interest in the survival and glory of the state. This relationship is difficult to build and requires genuine leadership, but it is the only foundation that can withstand the brutal pressures of history. To choose the easy path of hired swords is to choose the path of eventual ruin. It is to fundamentally misunderstand that true power is not something you can purchase, but something you must command from the hearts of your people. This harsh realism about military matters extends directly to Machiavelli's revolutionary ideas on princely finance. He poses a question that cuts to the core of leadership. Is it better for a ruler to be considered liberal or parsimonious? The conventional wisdom then as now would favor liberality. A generous king, one who showers his subjects and supporters with gifts and lavish spending, is surely a beloved king. But Machiavelli, with his characteristic disregard for comfortable illusions, turns this idea on its head. He argues that the reputation for generosity is a dangerous trap, a gilded path that leads directly to contempt and ruin. It is the prince who is seen as a miser, a paunduro, who ultimately holds the stronger and more stable position. The logic is brutally simple. To be considered liberal, a prince must constantly spend. He must fund extravagant festivals, build opulent monuments, and reward his followers with lands and gold. This creates an expectation, a constant demand for more. At first, this spending might come from the prince's own reserves, but soon that treasury will run dry. To maintain his reputation for generosity, he will be forced to turn to the only other source of income available, his people. He will have to impose heavy taxes, seize property, and bleed his subjects dry. In his desperate attempt to be loved for his open-handedness, he will inevitably become hated for his rapacity. The very actions taken to secure affection will breed resentment among the populace. The prince who practices liberality, therefore, finds himself in an impossible bind. He injures many, the taxpayers, to reward a few. He becomes dependent on the goodwill of a small circle of beneficiaries while earning the animosity of the masses. And when adversity strikes, as it always does, he will find his treasury empty and his people unwilling to support him. His generosity will have bought him fair-weather friends and real, enduring enemies. He will have squandered the single most important resource a state possesses, its financial resilience. Machiavelli saw this as a form of political suicide, a slow and pleasant poison that convinces the ruler he is loved right up until the moment the daggers are drawn. Conversely, consider the prince who is not afraid to cultivate a reputation for being parsimonious, or in less flattering terms, a miser. From the outset, he does not create an expectation of lavish spending. He is careful with the state's finances, funding only what is necessary for defense and the proper administration of justice. His subjects may grumble at his lack of spectacle. They may call him stingy behind his back, but crucially, he is not forced to burden them with excessive taxes. He lives within the state's means. By not taking their property, he allows them to prosper through their own industry, secure in the knowledge that the fruits of their labor will not be confiscated to fund some courtly extravagance. This prudent financial management is not an end in itself, it is a strategic tool. Because the parsimonious prince has not exhausted his treasury, he is always prepared for the unexpected. When war threatens, he has the funds to raise an army and equip it properly without having to resort to emergency taxes that would anger his people. He can finance long campaigns, absorb the shock of a bad harvest, or weather any other storm that fortuna might throw his way. His stinginess is, in fact, a form of foresight. It is a recognition that the true measure of a state's health is not its current splendor, but its ability to survive a crisis. The prince's reputation for being Machiavelli is the very thing that guarantees his strength. This reveals a deeper, counterintuitive truth about political psychology. In the long run, Machiavelli argues, the prince who is parsimonious will come to be seen as more truly liberal than the one who spends freely. Why? Because his careful management allows the state to function without oppressing its citizens. His generosity is expressed not through handouts to a few favorites, but through the security and stability he provides for everyone. He does not need to rob his subjects to pay for his wars or his court. This is the highest form of liberality a ruler can offer, the freedom for his people to live their lives and build their fortunes without the constant fear of a grasping, predatory state. The dilemma between being loved and being feared is central here. The liberal prince desperately wants to be loved, and in chasing that affection, he bankrupts the state and earns the hatred of his people. The parsimonious prince accepts that he may not be loved for his spending habits. He is willing to be feared for his strictness and his focus on the bottom line. However, Machiavelli notes that while it is best to be both loved and feared, if one must choose, it is much safer to be feared than to be loved. Love is held by a bond of obligation which, because men are fickle, is easily broken. Fear, however, is maintained by a dread of punishment which never fails. The miserly prince, by preserving his power, maintains that fear and, with it, order. This is not an endorsement of cruelty or needless oppression. Machiavelli is careful to distinguish between being feared and being hated. A prince should avoid being hated at all costs, and the surest way to be hated is to take the property and the women of his subjects. The parsimonious prince, by the very nature of his financial policy, avoids this. He does not need to take their property. The spendthrift prince, on the other hand, is almost guaranteed to become a predator, driven by his empty coffers to seize the assets of his people. Therefore, the reputation for miserliness is a powerful tool for avoiding the one thing that can truly destroy a ruler, the hatred of those he governs. This approach demonstrates that the management of money is, for Machiavelli, a core element of statecraft, inseparable from military and political strategy. A prince's fiscal policy is a direct reflection of his understanding of power. A ruler who engages in conspicuous consumption and lavish displays of wealth is revealing his own insecurity. He is trying to buy affection and project an image of power because he lacks the real substance of it. The truly confident prince, the one who possesses genuine virtue, does not need such theatrics. His power is demonstrated not by the gold he throws away, but by the disciplined, well-equipped army he can field at a moment's notice. The ultimate lesson here is the difference between appearance and reality, a theme that runs through all of Machiavelli's work. The appearance of generosity is seductive, but ultimately destructive. The appearance of miserliness is unflattering, but is the bedrock of real strength and stability. The wise prince must look beyond the immediate gratification of being popular and focus on the long-term health of the state. He must understand that the state's treasury is not his personal piggy bank, to be used to win friends and influence people. It is the lifeblood of the nation, the essential fuel for the engine of war and government, and it must be guarded with a miser's jealousy. This brings us to the synthesis of Machiavelli's thought, the core principle that governs his entire worldview on wealth and power. For him, money is a necessary component of statecraft, but it is always, and without exception, a servant, never the master. It is a tool, a means to an end, and that end is the acquisition and maintenance of the state. A leader who forgets this, who begins to believe that the accumulation of wealth is the goal itself, has already sown the seeds of his own destruction. He is like a general who becomes so obsessed with the beauty and polish of his sword that he forgets its purpose is to fight. The gold in the treasury is merely potential energy. It is worthless without the will and the mechanism to convert it into decisive action. Machiavelli would have scoffed at the modern obsession with economic indicators as the sole measure of national strength. A large GDP and a full treasury are advantages, to be sure, but they are not power itself. Power, in his unyielding analysis, resides in the ability to compel others to do your will. This ability is rooted in a well-disciplined army loyal to the state, a populace that is not resentful of your rule, and a leader who possesses the virtue, the skill, cunning, and ruthlessness to navigate the treacherous waters of politics. Money can help facilitate these things, but it cannot create them. It can buy weapons, but not the courage to use them. It can pay for fortifications, but not the spirit to defend them. He famously addressed the old adage that money is the sinews of war. While acknowledging that finance is important, he fiercely subordinates it to the primary factor, good soldiers. His logic is, as always, grounded in a stark assessment of reality. A prince with a loyal and effective army can always find the means to wage war. If he lacks money, his soldiers can take it from the enemy. A victorious army will secure treasure, resources, and taxable new territories. Good soldiers, in essence, will find gold. The inverse, however, is dangerously untrue. A prince with a vast treasury but no loyal army is simply a target. His wealth does not protect him. It invites predation. His gold will not find him good soldiers when crisis hits. It will only attract jackals looking to plunder his defenseless state. Consider the figure of Cesare Borgia, a man Machiavelli observed up close and deeply admired for his virtue, despite his cruelty. Borgia carved out a state for himself in central Italy through audacity, deception, and brutal efficiency. He understood that power came from action. He relied on his own cunning and the forces he commanded directly, using French troops and eventually building his own loyal army. The money and resources he acquired were a consequence of his successful conquests, not the cause of them. He used wealth instrumentally to pay his soldiers and consolidate his gains, but his driving force was ambition and a supreme confidence in his own ability to impose his will upon the world. He was the master of his resources, not the other way around. This illustrates the crucial difference between means and ends. For Machiavelli, the end is always the glory and stability of the state. Everything else, money, alliances, even morality itself, is a means to be evaluated solely on its effectiveness in achieving that end. A leader who becomes obsessed with the means, who starts to believe that having the most money is the same as being the most powerful, has lost sight of the goal. He is managing a bank, not leading a state. He is vulnerable to anyone who understands the true, brutal arithmetic of power, that an organized force, driven by a unified will, can always overcome a disorganized mass, no matter how wealthy it may be. Machiavelli's insight is that wealth creates a dangerous sense of complacency. It is a buffer against reality, allowing a ruler to believe he can solve any problem by throwing money at it. Need an army? Hire one. Need an ally? Bribe one. This approach avoids the hard work of leadership, forging a bond with your people, instilling discipline and a sense of national purpose, and cultivating your own strategic genius. It is a shortcut that leads off a cliff. The true leader, the Prince of Virtue, embraces the hard work. He understands that his most valuable asset is not in his vault, but in the hearts and minds of his soldiers and subjects. This is a form of capital that cannot be quantified on a balance sheet, but is infinitely more valuable. The power of this idea is its timelessness. It strips away the complex financial instruments and economic theories of any particular era and reduces power to its primal elements. At its core, the ability to rule is the ability to organize and direct human energy towards a common goal. This requires persuasion, inspiration, fear, and a deep understanding of human nature. These are the arts of the political leader, and they cannot be outsourced or bought. A modern CEO who believes his company's massive cash reserves make it invincible is making the same mistake as Machiavelli's Florentine bankers. He is forgetting that a motivated, innovative rival with a loyal team can render his financial advantages meaningless. Therefore, the final chilling piece of advice from the Florentine is to see money for what it is, an inanimate object, a pile of metal or a number in a ledger. It has no will, no loyalty, no courage. It is a powerful servant, but a catastrophic master. The leader who allows himself to be mastered by it, who fears spending it on necessary wars, or who believes possessing it makes him safe, has abdicated his role. He has handed the reins of his own destiny over to an illusion. The true prince knows that power is a human phenomenon, a dynamic force that flows from his own will and the will of those who follow him. And so we arrive at the climax of his argument, the powerful, direct quote that shatters the common wisdom of his time and ours. When confronted with the universal belief that gold is the ultimate arbiter of conflict, Machiavelli delivers his final verdict, a phrase that should be carved into the desk of every president, CEO, and general. He declares with absolute certainty, "It is not gold, as the common opinion cries out, that is the sinew of war, but good soldiers." This is not just a clever aphorism. It is the radical conclusion of a lifetime spent observing the brutal dance of power, failure, and survival. It is the ultimate statement that human agency, organized and directed with virtue, will always triumph over inert material wealth. Here then lies the brutal, clarifying climax of Machiavelli's thought. It is the moment the curtain is torn away, revealing the gears of history turning not on axles of gold, but on the grit of human will. The assertion that good soldiers, not gold, are the sinews of war is a direct assault on centuries of conventional wisdom. It suggests that the entire edifice of power, so often measured by treasury reports and economic output, is a fragile illusion. The real foundation is something far more primal and difficult to quantify: the loyalty and effectiveness of an armed force bound to the state. This is the ultimate stress test for any ruler, any nation, any leader. When the treaties fail and the diplomacy ends, what is left? Is it a pile of wealth or a corps of men willing to fight and die for your cause? This is not a simple preference for military might over economic strength. It is a profound statement about cause and effect. Machiavelli is arguing that a strong military born of a unified and spirited populace is the cause of a state's security and prosperity, while wealth is merely an effect. A state that can defend its borders, enforce its laws, and project its power will inevitably create a stable environment where commerce can flourish and wealth can be generated. But a state that focuses solely on generating wealth while neglecting the instruments of its own defense is simply fattening itself for slaughter. It becomes a tempting prize for any rival who understands this fundamental truth, a rival who has invested not in gold but in steel and sinew. The entire argument culminates in an idea of terrifying simplicity, an inversion of logic that is the key to Machiavelli's enduring genius. Good soldiers will always find gold, but gold will not always find good soldiers. Let that sink in. A disciplined, victorious army can seize the enemy's treasury, conquer resource-rich lands, and impose tribute. Force creates wealth, but a vault full of gold cannot, in the desperate hour of a foreign invasion, magically conjure a loyal army from thin air if the foundations of trust and civic virtue have been allowed to decay. The gold may in fact hasten the end, either by being used to pay a handsome ransom for a swift surrender, or by becoming the loot that rewards the conquering invaders. Wealth is a prize. It is not the power to defend the prize. What truly animates a state, then, is not its material resources, but the intangible quality of virtue. This is the catalyst, the spark of human agency that transforms potential into reality. It is the prince's strategic insight, the general's battlefield courage, the soldier's disciplined ferocity, and the citizen's patriotic resolve. A leader with virtue can take a poor, disunited people and forge them into a formidable power. He can create a state from nothing but his own will and the loyalty he inspires. A leader who lacks virtue but sits atop a mountain of inherited wealth is merely a placeholder, a steward of resources he does not truly command. He is powerless because he cannot convert his material advantage into decisive action when it matters most. This forces us to reevaluate our heroes and villains of history. We see conquerors who rose from obscurity, fueled by little more than ambition and the loyalty of their followers, who then went on to command vast empires and fortunes. Their power created their wealth. We also see fabulously rich empires, drowning in luxury and complacency, that crumbled before barbarian hordes who possessed nothing but discipline and a hunger for conquest. The latter's virtue was a more potent weapon than all the gold of the former. This is the recurring pattern Machiavelli identified. Power is an active, dynamic force, a human creation. Wealth is a passive, inert substance, a mere tool waiting to be wielded by a hand with purpose. The critical turn, then, is not just a historical observation, it is a direct challenge to our own deeply held beliefs. We live in a world utterly mesmerized by wealth, a world that equates billionaires with visionaries and market capitalization with national strength. We have built a global system on the premise that money is the ultimate measure of all things. But what if this is the same grand delusion that afflicted the Florentine Republic? What if we are all living in a gilded cage, admiring the shine of the bars, while forgetting that they cannot protect us from a determined adversary who cares little for our economic models and everything for our will to fight? Machiavelli's revelation places a profound and uncomfortable doubt at the heart of our modern certainty. Suddenly, his world doesn't seem so distant. The questions he posed echo in our headlines. Does a nation's true strength lie in its stock market, or in the morale and readiness of its soldiers? Can a corporation's vast cash reserves save it from a more agile, innovative, and loyal team of rivals? The climax of Machiavelli's argument is this terrifying moment of doubt. It forces us to look past the symbols of power, the skyscrapers, the financial reports, the overflowing treasuries, and ask what lies beneath. Is there a core of human resolve, of unity and willingness to sacrifice, or is there only a hollow shell waiting for a crisis to expose its fragility? The answer, he warns us, is the only one that truly matters. 5 centuries have passed since Machiavelli walked the corridors of Florentine power, yet his ghost haunts our own Gilded Age. We have built a world on the foundations of capital, a global civilization that worships at the altar of the market. Our leaders are judged by economic growth, our companies by their quarterly earnings, and our personal success by the size of our bank accounts. We have become masters at generating and counting our gold. But have we forgotten the Florentines' stark warning? In our relentless pursuit of wealth, have we begun to mistake the symbol for the substance, the means for the end? The lesson of Machiavelli is more urgent than ever, a chilling whisper from the past, reminding us that the most prosperous societies can become the most fragile if they lose their virtue. Look to the world stage, where nations boast of their economic dominance, while their social fabric frays and their civic spirit wanes. Look to the corporate world, where titans of industry flush with cash are disrupted and dismantled by smaller, hungrier startups, driven by a unified vision and a loyal team. The pattern is the same one Machiavelli observed in the Italian city-states. The reliance on financial advantage alone breeds complacency, a dangerous belief that every problem can be solved with a check. It ignores the unpredictable, unquantifiable power of human will, innovation, and belief in a cause. History is a graveyard of wealthy, powerful entities that believed they were too big to fail, only to be swept away by forces they could not buy or control. This ancient lesson extends beyond the realm of princes and presidents. It speaks to the very nature of our individual ambitions. We are taught to chase wealth as the ultimate prize, the key to freedom, security, and influence. But the Florentine diplomat would ask us, what are you commanding? A life spent accumulating resources without cultivating a core of purpose, without inspiring loyalty in others, without the personal strength to withstand the storms of fortuna, is a hollow one. It is to build a magnificent palace with no foundation. The pursuit of money as an end in itself leaves one rich in possessions but poor in power, a master of nothing, least of all oneself. The true measure of a life is not what you own, but what you can command when all you have is your own character. In the final analysis, Machiavelli's philosophy is a stark reminder that true power is an intensely human phenomenon. It cannot be mined from the ground, printed by a treasury, or traded on an exchange. It must be forged in the crucible of shared struggle, earned through wisdom and audacity, and maintained through a delicate, often brutal understanding of human nature. The throne, the corner office, the seat of influence, these are just chairs. Money can certainly buy the chair, providing the opportunity for authority, but it can never ever guarantee the loyalty of those you lead or the respect of those you oppose. That is a currency of a different kind, one that must be paid for in courage, in vision, and sometimes in fear. And so we are left with a final, unsettling question. As we navigate our own complex world of shimmering wealth and digital illusions, are we building our lives, our companies, and our nations on a solid foundation of human resolve? Or are we, like those Florentine princes of old, simply polishing the gold on a sinking ship? The answer defines the line between enduring power and spectacular ruin. For in the end, what you command is infinitely more important than what you possess. And that is the one timeless secret of power that Niccolo Machiavelli dared to tell.